When the Galactic Empire assassinates a human diplomat during peace talks, humanity's peaceful existence is shattered. What begins as a diplomatic mission ends in a declaration of full-scale war. With no choice but to fight for survival, the human race unleashes a fierce, unexpected resistance that takes the Empire by surprise. Can the underdog species, still young and untested, defeat the most powerful force in the galaxy? The fate of humanity hangs in the balance in this high-stakes battle for survival. Humanity had come a long way since the first tentative steps into the stars. Earth, once a solitary planet in a vast and uncaring universe, had expanded its reach across neighboring systems, establishing colonies and forming fragile alliances with alien species. The United Earth Council, a coalition of human governments, had worked tirelessly to ensure peace with the other powers of the galaxy. But despite the advancements in technology and diplomacy, there was still a looming threat: the Galactic Empire. An ancient and powerful coalition of alien races, the Empire ruled over vast swathes of space with an iron grip, maintaining dominance through fear, advanced weaponry, and ruthless tactics. For years, the Empire had avoided direct conflict with humanity. Perhaps it was due to the sheer distance between their core territories or their underestimation of human potential. But the peace between the two was tenuous at best. Tensions had risen as skirmishes broke out along the borders of human and imperial space, each side blaming the other for provocation. These small conflicts had threatened to ignite something much larger, something the United Earth Council feared would lead to total war. To prevent that, the Council took a bold step. They chose their finest diplomat, Ambassador Lydia Morgan, to lead a mission to the heart of the Empire. She was humanity's best hope for achieving a lasting peace, a woman whose intellect and negotiating skills were unmatched. A seasoned veteran of intergalactic diplomacy, Lydia had a reputation for achieving the impossible. She had brokered deals in hostile environments, convinced warring factions to come to the table, and even convinced more than one alien species to lay down their weapons. If there was anyone who could prevent war with the Empire, it was Lydia. The day she departed for the imperial capital was one of high expectation. The Council had put all their trust in her abilities, hoping she could succeed where others had failed. The political stakes were immense. Failure could lead to a galactic war, one that humanity was far from ready to fight. It was a war they had worked their entire history to avoid. As Lydia boarded the diplomatic cruiser that would take her to the Empire's flagship, the atmosphere on Earth was thick with anticipation. The ship was a symbol of peace, a diplomatic envoy meant to carry not just her personal message, but the hopes and fears of an entire species. Humanity was sending its best, and the stakes could not have been higher. Her journey to the heart of the Empire was long and perilous, but Lydia remained focused on the task ahead. She would meet the Empire's leadership cold, calculating, and enigmatic figures whose motives were unclear. Would they negotiate in good faith, or would they see her as little more than a pawn to manipulate? These were the questions that lingered in her mind as the cruiser slipped through the void of space, drawing ever closer to the imperial capital. Little did she know that this mission, meant to secure peace, would soon become the spark that ignited a war. The Empire's leaders had already decided they would not let a human diplomat interfere with their control over the galaxy. The consequences of their decision would be felt across the stars, and humanity would be thrust into a battle for survival that would change everything. The Grand Hall aboard the Imperial flagship was a place of ancient power, its towering, ornate architecture designed to intimidate any who entered. It was a space where deals were made and broken with no regard for the lives caught in the balance. The room was filled with alien beings from various corners of the galaxy, their skin ranging from translucent blue to deep metallic shades, their eyes cold and calculating. There were representatives from the many factions that composed the Galactic Empire, each one eager to assert their importance in this momentous meeting. Lydia Morgan, the human ambassador, was escorted to the center of the room, where she stood alone, seemingly insignificant amidst the sea of imposing figures. Her mind raced as she took her place at the podium. The gravity of the situation settled in her chest, but she held herself with poise. She had faced difficult negotiations before, but nothing like this. The Empire was a vast entity, and their leadership was known for being unpredictable, even treacherous. She had prepared for every scenario, rehearsing speeches and responses, but there was always the lurking suspicion that the Empire's true intentions would be revealed once she stepped into the heart of their domain. The Emperor's representative, a towering creature with dark, multifaceted eyes, stepped forward to greet her. His voice was like the sound of metal scraping against stone, mechanical and detached. He offered her a perfunctory bow, and the words exchanged between them were polite, but laced with an unspoken tension. Lydia did not trust him, but she knew her role. Diplomacy required patience, and she had learned the hard way that pushing too hard could make the difference between peace and open conflict. She began her speech, speaking of humanity's desire for peace and cooperation. Her words were carefully chosen, hoping to convey the genuine intent behind her mission. She spoke of shared prosperity, of an alliance that could transcend the borders of their worlds and bring forth a future where the Empire and humanity could coexist. The words seemed to hang in the air, thick with hope, yet she could feel the eyes of the Empire's leaders on her, their expressions unreadable. As she finished, a tense silence settled over the room. The Empire's leaders exchanged subtle glances, and for a moment, Lydia thought she could sense the faintest flicker of doubt. But before she could take another breath, the atmosphere shifted. A sudden explosion rocked the hall, sending a deafening shockwave through the air. The ornate walls trembled as the room was filled with smoke and debris. Screams echoed in the distance, and confusion gripped the assembly as chaos erupted. Lydia's bodyguards sprang into action, their weapons drawn and defensive formations quickly taking shape around her. But the chaos was not enough to shield her from what was to come. Amid the confusion, from the shadows, a single figure impossibly fast emerged with deadly precision. In the blink of an eye, a pulse shot through the air, striking Lydia square in the chest. The impact sent her crashing to the ground, her body crumpling lifelessly against the cold stone floor. The room went still, as if time itself had momentarily stopped. Her guards rushed to her side, but it was too late. Lydia Morgan, the human diplomat who had been entrusted with the future of her species, was dead. The Empire's leaders stood in stunned silence, but their reaction was swift. They quickly issued a statement, claiming that the assassination was the work of a rogue faction, a small group of radicals that had acted without sanction. It was an explanation meant to quell the rising tensions, to paint the incident as a tragic accident rather than an act of deliberate violence. But as the news of Lydia's death reached the human colonies, there was no mistaking the truth. This was no accident. The Empire had killed her, and in doing so, they had sealed the fate of their empire. The humans would not let this act go unpunished. The peace that Lydia had fought so hard to build was now shattered, and a war, one that the Empire had thought impossible, was about to erupt. The galaxy would never be the same. Back on Earth, the news of Ambassador Lydia Morgan's assassination sent shockwaves across the entire planet. The moment the broadcast aired, it was as though time itself had come to a grinding halt. People across the world stood frozen, their faces glued to screens as they watched the footage of the diplomat's body lying lifeless in the Imperial Hall. The human race had always known that peace with the Empire was fragile, but no one had imagined that it would end in such a brutal, deliberate act of violence. Lydia had been more than just a diplomat. She was a symbol of humanity's hopes and aspirations for a future beyond conflict. Her death was an unforgivable breach of trust, a betrayal of the very idea of diplomacy. In the United Earth Council's central chambers, the atmosphere was electric with anger, disbelief, and a cold, hard resolve. President Alexander Byrne, a man who had long warned of the Empire's true nature, stood at the head of the room. His normally composed demeanor was now marked by an undeniable fury. The assassination of Lydia Morgan was not just the loss of an individual, it was an assault on the very essence of humanity's place in the galaxy. The council members, representatives from all corners of the human colonies, exchanged heated words, their voices rising in outrage. There could be no more negotiation, no more attempts at diplomacy. The Empire had shown its true face, and it was a face of cruelty and deceit. Enough is enough, President Byrne declared, his voice steady despite the rage bubbling within him. We will not sit idly by while they kill our people. We will not be silent in the face of this atrocity. The council members nodded in agreement, each one knowing that the decision before them was not one to be taken lightly. The Empire had made its move, and now humanity had no choice but to respond in kind. They had a long history of surviving against the odds, but this was different. This was no small skirmish or isolated incident. This was an act of war, and the response had to match the scale of the offense. The decision was swift and unanimous. The United Earth Council, in an emergency session that lasted mere hours, declared full-scale war on the Galactic Empire. It was a moment of unity that transcended politics, a rare display of solidarity in the face of overwhelming threat. Humanity would not be cowed, would not bend to the will of an empire that had shown no respect for their sovereignty. The loss of Lydia Morgan was not just a personal tragedy, it was a turning point. Humanity had endured for centuries, had built their colonies from dust and grit, and now they would fight to protect their future. Within days, Earth's military infrastructure shifted into overdrive. Shipyards that had long been dormant, manufacturing ships for peaceful exploration and scientific study, now hummed with activity. The factories that had once produced civilian goods now turned to the creation of weapons of war. The Council's directives were clear: humanity would go to war with everything they had. The space fleets, once small and fragile in comparison to the might of the Empire, were being refitted and upgraded with everything humanity could muster. Every scientist, engineer, and soldier knew the stakes, and the pressure to succeed was immense. The Empire's technological edge was vast, but humanity's resilience, their drive, was equally immense. As the first wave of human warships readied themselves for deployment, there was no turning back. Earth's defenses, strengthened and expanded, were now ready to repel any attack the Empire might send. But even more than that, humanity had something the Empire had never counted on: unity and resolve. The assassination of Lydia Morgan had lit a fire within the hearts of millions, a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The Empire had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the human spirit, and now they would face the consequences. War was inevitable, and it was coming with a vengeance. Humanity would not rest until they had avenged their diplomat and secured their place in the galaxy. The die was cast. The war for the future of the galaxy had begun. The first clash between the human and Imperial forces came faster than anyone had anticipated. The Empire, confident in their superiority, had underestimated humanity's capacity to adapt and fight back. In the outer rim of human-controlled space, a small, strategically important colony came under threat. Imperial forces had gathered, ready to crush the fledgling human resistance. It seemed like an easy target, a routine operation to remind humanity of the Empire's unchallenged power. But what the Empire didn't realize was that the United Earth Council had already mobilized its forces, preparing for the worst after the declaration of war. The human fleet, though smaller than the Empire's, was not without its strengths. Under the command of General Catherine Hale, a seasoned veteran with years of experience in both diplomacy and warfare, the human fleet had been carefully upgraded with new technologies designed specifically to exploit the Empire's weaknesses. The humans had been working in secret for months, developing advanced propulsion systems, adaptive shields, and stealth technology that would allow them to outmaneuver the Empire's massive ships. While the Empire's ships were powerful, they were also predictable, slow to change, heavily reliant on their overwhelming firepower and technology. The battle began with a sharp, brutal engagement. The Empire's fleet, arriving in full force, thought they would easily overpower the human defenses. They sent waves of attack ships, their massive dreadnoughts leading the charge, eager to wipe out the colony and send a message to Earth. The Imperial fleet was a sight to behold: massive, intimidating, a testament to the Empire's centuries of dominance. The human fleet, in contrast, was far smaller, consisting of older ships hastily retrofitted for war. But it didn't take long for the Empire to realize that this wouldn't be the quick, decisive victory they had anticipated. The first wave of Imperial ships was met with a barrage of human fire. General Hale had anticipated their moves, setting up a series of traps that would allow her fleet to strike fast and retreat before the Empire could retaliate. Human ships darted in and out of the battlefield, using their speed and maneuverability to avoid direct confrontation. In the chaos, several Imperial dreadnoughts were severely damaged, their shields overwhelmed by the intensity of the human attacks. Despite their superior numbers and firepower, the Empire found itself unable to land a decisive blow. The Empire quickly adapted, sending reinforcements to the fray, but it was too late. the human fleet had already shifted tactics, using their knowledge of the Empire's patterns to launch a devastating counterattack. Using newly developed stealth technology, a handful of human ships slipped past the Empire's outer defenses, striking at key targets deep within the Imperial fleet. The results were catastrophic for the Empire. Several key cruisers were destroyed in the surprise attack, their destruction throwing the Imperial forces into disarray. On the ground, the colony's defenses were equally formidable. While the Empire's fleet focused on the space battle, human ground forces, equipped with advanced weaponry and fortified positions, fought fiercely to protect their home. The battle on the surface was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. But despite the Empire's superior numbers, the human forces held their ground. The Imperial commanders had underestimated humanity's will to fight, especially when defending their homes and loved ones. As the battle raged on, the tide began to shift. The Empire's once confident forces were being pushed back, their lines buckling under the relentless human onslaught. The shock of the human resistance was felt across the Empire, but it was already too late for them to pull back without suffering catastrophic losses. By the time the battle ended, the Imperial fleet had been forced into retreat, their ships crippled, their forces scattered. The human forces, though battered, had held their ground and dealt a crippling blow to the Empire's plans. For humanity, the victory was a hard-fought but significant one. They had proven that they could stand against the might of the Empire, that they could fight with ingenuity, determination, and fierce resolve. The Empire had been thrown off balance, but this was just the beginning. Both sides knew that this was only a small skirmish in the larger war, but for humanity, it was a clear sign that they could win. The victory sent a message across the galaxy: humanity was not to be underestimated. The Empire had made a grave mistake, and they would pay for it. The war was just beginning, but humanity had already shown that it was ready to fight, no matter the odds. The news of the human victory spread quickly throughout the galaxy, rippling outward from the front line to every corner of known space. The Empire, once so secure in its dominance, now found itself shaken to its core. The defeat at the colony had exposed a vulnerability they had not known existed, and the shockwaves reverberated throughout the Imperial hierarchy. In the Emperor's inner circle, there was no longer any question: humanity could not be ignored. They were no longer the insignificant species the Empire had believed them to be. And this realization sent fear coursing through the ranks of Imperial commanders, who now understood that they were in a war unlike any they had fought before. Back on Earth, the sense of unity and defiance only grew stronger. General Hale, hailed as a hero after the victory, became a symbol of humanity's resilience. Yet even as the human forces celebrated their triumph, the reality of the war ahead began to set in. The Empire would not tolerate such a loss, and their retaliation would be swift and brutal. The next phase of the war would not be fought on the fringes of human space, it would be fought on Earth itself. The United Earth Council, understanding the gravity of the situation, prepared for a prolonged conflict. The war had become not just a fight for survival, but a fight for the very future of humanity. Every resource, every soldier, and every scientist now worked with one singular goal: to ensure that Earth would not fall to the Empire. The homeworld, once peaceful and isolated, was now a fortress bracing for the inevitable assault. As the weeks passed, Earth's defenses were fortified beyond recognition. The military built massive orbital platforms equipped with heavy weapons, and entire fleets of warships were stationed just beyond the atmosphere, ready to defend the planet from any Imperial incursion. The cities were transformed into strongholds, with every man, woman, and child contributing to the war effort. Factories produced weapons and supplies at a staggering pace, while scientists raced to develop new technologies that could give humanity the upper hand. Earth had become a war machine, and no one could afford to slacken their efforts. The Empire, meanwhile, was not idle. In the wake of their defeat, the Emperor issued a statement to his people, an ultimatum, a declaration that humanity would pay for their insolence. The Empire would bring the full force of its military might to bear on Earth, and no quarter would be given. This was no longer just a matter of suppressing a rebellion, it was a matter of ensuring that no other species in the galaxy would ever dare challenge the Empire again. The first signs of Imperial retaliation came swiftly. A fleet of battlecruisers, far larger than anything humanity had encountered before, was dispatched from the Empire's core systems. They entered the outer rim of human space like a storm, cutting through the defenses with ruthless precision. Their mission was clear: they would destroy Earth's defenses and crush humanity's resistance once and for all. But humanity was prepared. As the Imperial fleet approached, General Hale oversaw the final stages of Earth's preparations. The human forces had learned from their first victory, and they knew that their best chance at survival lay in exploiting the one advantage they had: surprise. Earth's defenses had been built to withstand a prolonged siege, but the true strength of humanity's response lay in the way they used their ships and technology. Hale had developed a daring plan, one that would catch the Empire off guard once again. The battle for Earth began with a cataclysmic explosion. Imperial ships, expecting a standard defense, found themselves suddenly surrounded by a swarm of human ships, their smaller vessels darting between the Imperial juggernauts, striking with surgical precision. The Empire's larger ships were slower, their power concentrated in a few massive weapons, but humanity's fleet was nimble, able to exploit gaps in the Imperial lines. The battle raged across the stars, and for the first time, it was clear the Empire's superiority was no longer absolute. The first wave of Imperial ships suffered heavy losses, but they pressed on, determined to breach Earth's defenses. The human forces, however, were relentless. With each attack, they adapted, learning and evolving faster than the Empire could predict. It became apparent to both sides that this was not going to be a quick war. Earth would not fall easily. The Empire's reinforcements, massive as they were, could not overcome the guerrilla tactics humanity employed. In space and on the ground, the fight for Earth escalated into an all-out battle of attrition. Neither side was willing to surrender, but humanity's resolve was growing stronger with every passing day. The Empire's advance had stalled, and for the first time they found themselves on the defensive. Humanity had shown that they could fight, that they could stand against the might of an empire that once seemed unbeatable. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had begun to shift. Humanity had not only survived the first wave of the Empire's wrath, they had made it clear that they would not be extinguished so easily. Earth was their home, and they would fight to the bitter end to keep it. The war had dragged on for months, and the Empire's expectations had crumbled. They had envisioned humanity's swift defeat, a quick and easy subjugation of a species they considered primitive and weak. Yet time and again, they had underestimated humanity's capacity for adaptation and determination. General Hale's forces had struck devastating blows, but the toll had been immense. Both sides had suffered grievous losses, and Earth, though still standing, had borne the brunt of the Empire's relentless attacks. Cities lay in ruin, the skies were darkened with the smoke of battle, and the once thriving colonies were now little more than war zones. Humanity had proven that it could resist, but survival no longer seemed certain. As the conflict raged on, something began to change. The people of Earth, once divided by politics, ideology, and national interests, had found a common cause. There were no longer separate nations, just one unified planet facing annihilation. Every human, regardless of their past, was now part of the war effort. The collective spirit of the species had grown stronger, the unity between civilians and soldiers unbreakable. Families volunteered to work in factories, engineers designed new weapons, and scientists worked day and night on ways to exploit the Empire's weaknesses further. Humanity was fighting for more than survival, they were fighting for their right to exist in the galaxy. On the battlefield, however, the tides of war had begun to shift in ways that even General Hale could not predict. The Empire had begun to grow desperate. Their supply lines were stretched thin, and the war, which they had expected to end quickly, had become a prolonged, costly affair. The Imperial fleet, once an unstoppable force, had been battered, its ships heavily damaged and vulnerable. As the human forces grew more skilled, the Empire found itself losing its strategic advantage. One particularly brutal engagement near the asteroid belt of the Outer Rim marked a turning point. The Imperial fleet, still intent on breaking through Earth's defenses, had launched a full-scale assault, hoping to cripple the human fleet once and for all. But Hale had anticipated their move. Her forces lured the Imperial ships into a trap, a battle of attrition designed to exhaust the Empire's resources and wear down their resolve. The ambush was successful. The human fleet, though outnumbered, struck with precision, disabling the Empire's most powerful ships before they could retaliate. The victory was decisive, but not without cost. The human fleet had taken heavy damage, and many of their ships were forced to withdraw to Earth for repairs. The Empire's retaliatory forces, still formidable, would soon regroup and the war would continue. But for the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope. The Empire was vulnerable. They had lost a significant portion of their fleet, and their ability to launch sustained operations against Earth had been severely hindered. In the heart of the Imperial command, however, there was panic. The Emperor's advisors had been frantically working to devise a plan to break the human resistance once and for all. The Imperial fleet was formidable, but they were beginning to realize that human ingenuity, determination, and unity were not something that could easily be crushed. The war was no longer a matter of simply overwhelming Earth with superior numbers. It had become a battle for the Empire's survival. The Emperor, whose patience was beginning to wear thin, summoned his most trusted warlords to an emergency meeting. The message was clear. Humanity had proven itself a worthy adversary, but the Empire could not afford to lose this war. A final, decisive strike was necessary. The resources of the Empire, though vast, were finite, and this conflict was draining them faster than anticipated. If humanity's resolve held out, they could outlast the Empire and win. As the warlords debated their next move, the United Earth Council made a bold decision. With the Empire's power beginning to wane, it was time for humanity to take the fight to the heart of the Empire. General Hale was given command of the newly assembled human invasion fleet, an unprecedented move that marked the beginning of a new phase in the war. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to end the conflict once and for all. If humanity could strike at the heart of the Empire, they could force the Empire to the negotiating table, or better yet, dismantle it altogether. The human fleet, now rebuilt and reinforced, would launch an all-out offensive into the heart of Imperial space. It was a desperate move, but it was the only choice left. As the fleet readied itself for its final mission, a sense of purpose and unity swept through the ranks. This would be the decisive moment, the culmination of everything humanity had fought for. Earth had survived the Empire's initial onslaught, and now they would bring the fight to the Empire itself. The stage was set for the most daring operation of the war. The outcome of this final assault would determine the fate of the galaxy and humanity's place within it. The war was far from over, but the end was drawing near. The final battle was unlike any other. The human fleet, once small and outmatched, now stood at the gates of the Empire's heart, prepared for the most daring strike of the war. General Hale's forces had been reinforced with ships and technologies scavenged from the remnants of previous victories. Every ounce of human ingenuity and determination was focused on this single, all-important mission to deliver a crushing blow to the Empire that would end the war once and for all. The risks were staggering. The Empire's core worlds were protected by some of the most advanced defenses in the galaxy. To breach them would require precision, strategy, and a resolve stronger than anything humanity had ever shown. The human fleet moved forward through the vast, empty stretches of Imperial space, each ship bearing the weight of their people's hopes. The fleet was smaller than it had been in previous engagements, but it was more experienced, more unified. Every officer and soldier understood that the outcome of this mission would shape the future of the galaxy. The mission was clear: strike at the Empire's capital world, the seat of their power, and cripple their command structure. It was humanity's final chance to end the war on their terms. As the fleet approached the Imperial capital, the Empire's defenses came into view. Massive space stations, orbiting dreadnoughts, and vast swarms of Imperial warships filled the skies like a wall of metal. The Empire had spared no effort in protecting their homeworld, and the human fleet now faced their toughest challenge yet. The sheer scale of the Empire's military might seem insurmountable. But humanity had learned from every previous engagement. They knew that brute force would not win this war. Strategy, stealth, and precision would. The human fleet broke into small, agile groups, using every trick they had learned over the past months. Ships moved in tight formations, dodging Imperial scanners, using asteroids and debris fields as cover. It was a calculated risk. If even one ship were detected too early, the entire mission could fail. But the human forces had prepared for this moment their entire lives. They understood the risks, and they were ready to face them. The first strike came as a surprise. A small squadron of stealth ships broke through the outer defenses of the Imperial capital's orbit and launched a series of devastating precision attacks on the Empire's key command and communications networks. The first blow hit the Empire hard. The vast network of communications went dark, disrupting their ability to coordinate a response. The shockwave of the attack sent ripples through the Imperial fleet. For the first time since the war began, the Empire found itself scrambling, trying to reorganize in the midst of chaos. General Hale's fleet moved in swiftly, using the confusion to strike at key targets. The Imperial warships, once invulnerable in their numbers, now found themselves vulnerable to guerrilla tactics. Human ships darted in and out of the shadows, hitting Imperial cruisers with devastating laser fire, disabling their engines and shields. The capital world's orbital defenses, once thought impenetrable, began to crumble under the relentless assault. The Empire, unable to mount an effective counterattack, began to fall into disarray. Their fleet was too large, too rigid to adapt quickly enough to the human tactics. The balance of power was shifting. On the surface of the Imperial homeworld, the battle raged as well. The Empire's military had made its last stand, deploying ground forces to defend their capital. But humanity had prepared for this moment, and their forces, equipped with advanced technologies and overwhelming determination, fought with the same ferocity that had characterized every previous battle. The streets of the Empire's capital city became a battleground, and the sounds of war echoed across the planet's surface. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and the once proud symbols of imperial power now lay in ruins. As the battle on the capital world reached its climax, the Emperor himself was forced into hiding. His once mighty empire, crumbling under the weight of human resistance, was no longer in control. With their communications shattered, their fleet in disarray, and their capital under siege, the Empire had no choice but to acknowledge what had become painfully clear: they could not win this war. The human forces had proven time and again that they were more than just survivors, they were a force capable of toppling empires. The final blow came when the last remaining Imperial warship, a massive dreadnought at the heart of the capital's defenses, was disabled in a daring strike by a squadron of human ships. With its destruction, the Imperial fleet was broken, and their ability to fight back collapsed. The Empire's hold on the galaxy was shattered, and the once mighty force was reduced to nothing more than a fractured remnant. For humanity, the victory was hard won, and the cost had been immense. But as the final remnants of the Imperial fleet retreated into the void, the war was over. Earth, against all odds, had survived. The war for humanity's future had been fought with blood, sweat, and tears, but in the end, humanity had proven what they were capable of. They had endured against an overwhelming force and had emerged victorious. The galaxy would never be the same. The Empire, once an unchallenged power, lay in ruins. Humanity had not only survived, they had triumphed. They had earned their place in the stars. And as the dust settled on the battlefield, General Hale stood, watching the last of the Imperial ships retreat into the distance. The war was over, and humanity had won, but the fight for their future was just beginning. The galaxy, once ruled by the Empire, now had room for new voices, and humanity would make sure that theirs was heard. The Empire has fallen, but the war for the galaxy's future is far from over. Humanity has proven that we are not to be underestimated. Now we hold the power. But what comes next? Who will rise to challenge our dominance? Only time will tell. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizon Stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure. The stars are waiting, and there's always a new battle to fight.